Hello and welcome to WriterSpeak, a program dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm your host today, Mikala Kennan, and with me is Kenna Lee, author of A Million Tiny Things, A Mother's Quest for Hope in a Changing Climate. It's a delightful, delightful read. I find it humorous. I find it relevant. She chronicles her philosophical determination to live a green life, all the while finding values in daily choices, competing for attention as she navigates the domestic sea of motherhood and kids and family life. It's a well-spoken, right-on, very relevant book. Kenna, welcome to WriterSpeak.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Tell us about your kids. Tell us about your family.
Oh, okay. Well, the book came about because I have three instead of the originally planned on two. So the original plan included the percussionist, who is my oldest, and he is a drummer. That's the name. I don't refer to them by their given names in the book, and some sort of writerly attempt to provide them with a tiny amount of privacy. And then my younger son, who's part of the original two, is Mowgli, because he is our somewhat hard to tame child.
Jungle Book.
Yes, it's a reference to the character in the Jungle Book, and he would probably be very happy living in the jungle. So those were the two that were there when the story began, and the book came about because I had number three, and she wasn't part of the plan. And she wasn't an accident child. As in a two-mom family, you rarely have accidents like that in that way. Lots of other kinds of accidents. So I wanted to have a third child, and the book begins with her birth. And I call her, because as she's born, her beautiful eyes open, and they were just shining bright. So her name for the book is Bright Eyes.
And we enter the book just about that time when you are facing that challenging question. Actually, in the book you write, I wanted number three more than I wanted to feel good about my choices. And so you're debating the whole thing. This unbearable feeling of motherhood, on your doorstep, but at the same time wondering, is it wise for me to have another child?
Exactly.
Talk a little more about that.
So the boys were born, and at no small cost to ourselves in terms of time and energy input. It wasn't the easiest thing for us to have children. So we had decided ahead of time that two was it. There's two of us, that's zero population growth. We figured we're probably also making up for some gay male couple, our neighbors, that don't have any kids. So we thought two kids was sustainable in some way. I know there's a lot of arguments for families only having one child or even no children in terms of, kind of planetary sustainability and planetary population growth. But we had decided that two was the right decision for us. And then when I was pregnant with Mowgli, who was the first one I gave birth to, my partner gave birth to our first, I was really overwhelmed with these feelings of sadness, like, oh my gosh, this is the only time I'm going to be doing this. And instead of just being a happy pregnant lady, I was a sad pregnant lady, like, oh my gosh, I'll never be 6 months pregnant again. Oh my gosh, I'll never be 7 months pregnant again. And my partner was just like, this is crazy. Like, we've been working for years to have these children, and you can't be sad. You have to be happy.
Right.
So she said, just don't open your mind to the possibility of another child. And her argument was pretty compelling. Like, yes, we've made this decision about, what's right for the planet, and one more child is not going to be the tipping point at which global warming spins out of control and the whole thing falls apart.
Right.
So even though I really do have these theoretically closely held values about making sustainable choices on an individual level, when those values came up against this very strong biological urge that I had to have one more child, the values gave way to the urge.
Sure.
And then having made that choice, I had the kind of buyer's remorse experience of, oh my gosh, what have I done? This wasn't, this isn't right. I shouldn't have done this. And, struggling through those feelings and the consequences of, having had this third child and what all it meant in terms of our consumption and our lifestyle. Then that's why I wrote the book, was navigating all those consequences and the decisions that they gave birth to.
And did you know that it was going to be a little girl or plan for one?
Well, I was a midwife for a long time, so I'm completely beyond trying to plan for anything when it comes to having babies. But the daughter, wanting a daughter, I think was secretly in my heart and not something that I had allowed into my head. So when I found out that she was a girl, I'd had some problems in the pregnancy that caused us to have an ultrasound. And when I had the ultrasound and they said it was a girl, I was so excited that I just immediately blocked it out and said, that's not possible, it's not true, you just didn't see it correctly and it's going to come out a boy. And so when she came out a girl, there was just this feeling of thrill that went right through me. And I still, every day, I look at her and feel that feeling of thrill. She's a delight.
You relate a story in the book where you're changing her diapers and just recognizing this beautiful little feminine entity that is so young and so fresh in the world. But you also then begin thinking, oh my goodness, how can I mother a daughter? What is this mothering a girl thing all about? Talk a little bit about that.
Right. I mean, being confronted, I was excited to have this girl and it was so thrilling. And then it's like, oh my gosh, like I've just landed back in Women's Studies 101 all over again, and what it means to grow up female in this world, and how, the broad swath of human history includes the oppression of women in so many ways and continues to, not necessarily so much in the town where I'm bringing up my girl, but in our larger culture, and that infiltrates our world, even though I try very hard to create a bubble, at least for while she's young, of seeing other strong, independent, happy and comfortable in our bodies women, like comfortable with the way we look. She's surrounded by, you can't go to the grocery store without seeing a bunch of airbrushed women. And I see the girls growing up around, that are a few years ahead of her, and I see how those images, those pervasive, constant images of women whose bodies aren't real, makes them feel about their own bodies. And so just on that level, as well as all the physical harms and hurts that can come to a girl child and to women in the world, it's overwhelming to feel that sense of, how do I protect this precious thing and keep it whole? And it was definitely, like another step off of the anxiety cliff for me.
Sure. And, it strikes me that the difficulty of raising kids in a very, very commercial world and having them want to go to McDonald's every day, and I know McDonald's is doing their best to, try and accommodate a different mindset, but you have to be navigating the stages of, okay, now I want this toy, or I'm ready for this particular rite of passage because I'm 4 years old, or can't I have a birthday cake with a lot of sweet pink icing on it, that kind of thing. You talk about a minivan, becoming a minivan mom, and that brought about a whole different set of considerations.
Yes. So the car that we were driving with just two boys was this little nice, compact, very fuel efficient, tiny station wagon. But the reality was, when my daughter was going to be born, my sons were still going to be in car seats. And just literally, you couldn't, like if you put 3 car seats in the back of that wagon, you had to kick the door closed and then lock it from the inside. And, one time we went around a corner and the door flew open, and it just didn't seem like it was reality to try to constantly pretend that our children were safe in the backseat of that car. So I went one direction with trying to buy this gigantic Mercedes and convert it to veggie oil so I wouldn't ever have to use gas. But my partner, who I call in the book the pragmatist, because she is not the type of person who thinks that a very elderly Mercedes that has a bunch of jerry-rigged tubes around it is a good idea for family transport. So to kind of placate her while I pursued my dalliance with the veggie oil car, I bought this minivan. And you know, you get into the showroom and they put you in the car, and you have, I mean, at that point we had 2 little toddler boys whose main activity was trying to hit each other. And it's like the seats are so far apart and everything is so comfortable. And the salesman says, now in this car, the driver controls all. And he shows you all these buttons where you can like open and close all the windows and open and close the doors without leaving your seat. And like you can turn the, you know, like heat on in the front and cold on in the back. And, you know, just this constant, like, you're like, oh, I control the universe. And that feeling of like, no one is fighting and everything is incredibly comfortable and I'm in control, whereas so much of my life feels out of control. You know, like I can't control climate change, but I can control my minivan. It's very seductive.
Oh boy, I bet.
Seductive. So the Mercedes kind of, as it broke down worse and worse and worse, kept giving way to the seductive comforts of the minivan. And as that happened, my own sense of how I was living in the world and the rightness with which I was living in the world was just being sucked through the gas tank. As you know, every time I drive, I'd be like, it's 19 miles per gallon. What have I become?
You know, I find, especially living here in Sonoma County, we almost need a vehicle as much as we try not to use it that much. We almost need one because it's just not transportation friendly in lots of ways. So
yeah, I noticed that before I had children, I had this dream of living out of town, you know, on a little mini farm, and we kept looking for places and ended up with a place very close to town but not really safe to bike. And I'm so grateful that I'm closer to town, because with kids, you're going to Little League, you're going somewhere all the time. And we just don't live in a place where it's safe until they're probably teenagers for us to bike. So yeah, you're right. This area is not that conducive to car-free living.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you also, as you're talking, I'm hearing you talk about the various times that you've had to kind of renegotiate your relationship with your values, your spirituality, your whole sense of self. You know, who am I as a mother and who am I as just a person on this earth? Talk a little bit about what you call in the book people of doubt and people of faith, and kind of where you fall in the middle of it.
Okay, well, I grew up in Tennessee, which is very, you know, religious type community, where one of the questions, you know, instead of what do you do, it's like, what church do you go to?
Yeah.
And I was very grounded in that community. I'm very grateful for having that community. You know, you have a place that you go, that's where people's values are about doing good in the world. And it's multi-generational, so you're around people of all different ages. And I grew up within a mythology. I grew up within the Christian mythology. And so I feel like that all grounds me very well. And at the same time, then I moved into a different kind of intellectual relationship with religion during my young adult years, that I've never kind of refound my way into the myth as a belief system. So I think I hold a lot of the values that I attribute to what is generally referred to as people of faith. You know, people who have a grounding in a kind of belief in something larger and a value system that springs from that. And yet, because I can't attach my own value system to that framework, I find myself a little bit, you know, about fluttering in the wind. So that's when I coined the term people of doubt. Was, you know, I'm not an atheist, and I'm not, I mean, I suppose I technically am an agnostic, but there's something about, like, I have a yearning, and I think there's a lot of people like me, we have a yearning towards finding that framework that we can attach ourselves to, but somehow the existent ones are just difficult to, especially for women, find a mythology that is able to incorporate a feminist way of being in the world. So coming from that place and then having children who really call on you to define your values and define your beliefs, and with whom, having children has made me want to believe in a God, to be able to have something larger than me that's taking care of them in a way. Yeah. So I haven't resolved that for myself, and therefore my children are growing up in a house full of doubt, but also a house full of seeking. So I think, there's worse things for children.
Well, absolutely. And part of it is you giving them permission to seek and to let them know there's lots of ways, and each one has some validity, and that, it's not all bad if you have a vision of something higher right now, and then maybe change your mind down the road a little bit as you grow.
Yeah, and we'll see what they find. Mowgli is definitely, since a very young age, whenever my parents send, they send a lot of what we call Jesus books at Christmas time, just so that there's some basis to, why is the world gone crazy other than Santa's coming? And I appreciate that. And at a very young age, when he was really hoping he'd get a gun for Christmas, which is not something he ever has or will get for Christmas, but he got a Jesus book from Grandma in the mail, and he looked at it and he said, "Oh, it's a Jesus book. I love Jesus." And he looked straight at me and said, "I love guns and Jesus."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, you're an American, so you'll do fine.
That's funny. That's funny. It takes me also into thoughts about the eco-balance and some of the dilemmas that you come up with respect to eating hamburgers, for example. Can we live on lentils alone, or what about that hamburger that just...
Yeah, I'm actually not that fond of lentils, and I was vegetarian for a long time, but that was part of my journey towards pregnancy. I couldn't get pregnant, and my acupuncturist kept saying, eat meat, and I was like, no, I'm going to take fertility drugs instead, and then I realized that was ridiculous. So I tried it, I immediately got pregnant, and my claim is that Mowgli was sitting on my shoulder saying, I'm not coming to a vegetarian house because that's all he wants to eat is meat. So since we do eat meat in our home, then we have to be so conscious about our choices. And Environmental Working Group, which is a group that I have a lot of respect for, came out recently with a kind of carbon guide to meat consumption. And so we've been looking at that a lot and saying, oh, actually, chicken has less carbon footprint than cheese. And going down the line, so we do eat meat. We eat more pork than beef because pork has a less carbon impact. We eat more chicken than pork. Usually, we've got next year's chicken dinners growing up right now in our yard. So we're trying to localize as much as we can. We've done it with the chicken, and we buy all of our meat from local farms. That's completely grass-fed, but even so, there's a methane impact to those animals' lifespans. So it's even when you're being kind of as righteous as possible, you're not. A plant-based diet would be a local plant-based diet would be even better, and that's where as the kids say, that's a big fail, So I'm, constantly moving towards things, and then I get, I hit up against the veggie burger, and I haven't quite taken that step yet, but we don't eat at McDonald's.
You tell a funny story in the book about buying a $20 chicken, and any of us who have tried to buy organic and buy some of the better, more PC, if you will, kinds of things, realize that it's a good stretch of our budget.
Yes, that's the chicken dinners in my backyard right now. Bright Eyes looked at them this morning and said, they just look so delicious.
Oh, no. Oh, my.
But yeah, so that was, this is exactly why I'm now raising my own chickens, because I had gone to the farmer's market and, my children want meat, especially Mowgli. He wants meat, and that's pretty much all he'll eat. So, and they'll eat eggs. So I had gone by and I'm walking down the things, and here's this farmer, and he's wearing his overalls and his straw hat, and he just looks like a farmer. He doesn't look like a farmer, he looks like a farmer from a storybook. And that's what we all want. You know, we don't want to eat food that's made from industrial farming. I mean, we don't even want to watch those films about it because they're disgusting and distressing, and we don't want to think about how much of that we've contributed to. So we want to think that our food came from this farmer wearing his overalls and a straw hat and his grass and, you know, his happy animals that just then, you know, come up against a harvester in the field one day. So here's the farmer, and he has this photo album of his happy animals running around the grass on his farm. He's out in West Marin, and they looked so happy. I was like, oh, I have to buy something from him. And he has eggs, and I'm like, I'm buying these wonderful, fabulous, happy chicken, free-range, grass-fed, organic eggs, and we are just going to be so, you know, full of righteousness and joy when we eat them. So I buy the eggs, and then, you know, I was so high off of that experience that, and I'd given him a goodly amount of cash for the eggs. I was so high from that I was like, oh, do you have any chickens back there? And he's like, I've got one left. So he opens his freezer and a cooler and pulls out this little tiny chicken. I was like, well, of course, it's the last one. Of course, it's very scrawny. And he hands it to me, and I hand him a $20 bill, and then he's chatting with me, and I'm chatting with him, and I'm feeling more and more awkward, and I'm kind of smiling and fidgeting and waiting for my change because I had this very scrawny chicken, and I had handed him a $20 bill, which was all the money I had in my pocket. So it was this whole awkward moment where I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting, and he's being very friendly and saying, you know, if I want to order chickens in advance, blah, blah, blah. And finally, my eyes wander over to the chalkboard that says, roasters, $5 a pound. Holding my chicken, I'm like, yep, that's about 4 pounds. And like 4 pounds times $5, great. So I was like, that's why he wasn't getting my change.
$20.
And yeah, so, and it was so, and it just even felt later after I realized that I wasn't getting any change. I was like, this is a tiny chicken. So that was a real eye-opener for me in terms of, you know, I really want to live this way. And what does that mean? Like, do I work more in order to live the, you know, to be able to afford to do the things I want? And if I'm working more, then how does that impact down the line? And are we eating out more? There's less time for cooking. There's less time for making all these righteous meals and going to the farmer's market. Or do I try to grow my own chickens, which at that stage, I had an infant. I was just, the idea of that, I mean, now my kids are older, so we're, you know, this is our first summer. We're like, we tried it last summer with 1 chicken, and we're like, okay, we did it. Now we'll do 20.
Oh,
but,
wow.
But it's, you know, when they're so little, it's just trying to think about like, okay, I'm going to build a chicken coop and suddenly become a chicken farmer. Like, no, I was like, I couldn't take on one more thing. I could barely get the diapers clean when it was time for them to come around.
Sure.
So it was just definitely like, and then if we really want this to be widespread, like if we think everyone should be eating this way, like people can afford a $20 chicken, you know? So
yeah. It makes me want to ask you just very quickly before we wrap up, how do we prioritize our values? And is it possible to absolutely do that, or do we need to be just ready to kind of take it moment by moment?
Well, it's very possibly that history will tell us we should have absolutely done it, but I think we're human. And part of what's good about being human is extending compassion and grace to other humans and receiving that from other humans. And I think that's what we have to do with ourselves and everyone else right now. At the same time that, you know, when my children were tiny, I wrote a book called A Million Tiny Things, because tiny things were all I could do. So at that point, hanging out my laundry and line drying my clothes instead of using natural gas was what I could do. And now that my children are older, I've been able to fly to Washington, D.C. and get arrested at the White House to protest the Keystone XL pipeline.
There you go.
So being able to, when you can, move into a political arena, because that's where the larger change has to happen, But also using the talents that you have to do that with and the resources that you have, and not feeling like you have to be someone you aren't in order to try to change the world, because we're only going to be able to change the world from bringing our best selves forward, and that means recognizing who our best selves are and going from that place.
And that's very, very, very well said.
Thank you.
The book is A Million Tiny Things. How can we get our own copy?
You can get your own copy in a million tiny ways. So the good place to start is the website. I have a website called just milliontinythings.com. So it's www.milliontinythings.com. And that has links. Here in Sonoma County, Copperfields carries it. Any independent bookseller can order it for you if they don't have it on the shelf. I'm trying to really encourage people to buy from independent booksellers, because they're what's keeping our intellectual life alive as a country. So buy it from an independent bookseller if you can. Otherwise, there are many online retailers that will serve you.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you. Do pick up a copy, because it's, again, a great read, and it really addresses a lot of the same kinds of things we're all thinking about, but maybe have been afraid to even admit. So I'm Mikala Kennan. Thank you, Kenna, for being with us today. And again, thank you for tuning in to WriterSpeak. We'll see you next time.